going? Really nice to be here today in some virtual context, and I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody properly later. But yes, today I'm going to be talking to you about malware on the Python package index. Now, my name's Max. I am a Python developer advocate at a company called Vonage, and I'm just here today to introduce this concept to you and to show you a real example where I infect my own machine with some malware. But before we get there, I just want to talk a little bit about this company that I work for. So I work for a company that works with communications APIs. So things like SMS, voice calls, two-factor authentication, video chats, all of those things done via APIs and as a service. So if that's interesting to you, look them up. But more importantly, my coworkers at this company no longer trust me. So I maintain the Python tooling here, and I have an SDK called the Python SDK, the Vonage Python SDK. But my colleagues now, if I send them a link, they don't want to click on that anymore. Now they know I've been researching my malware talk. And so I'll actually show you maybe why, is that this is a real package that I uploaded to the Python package index. Which is named a bit like my package, except I've called it not the Vonage Python SDK. And this might be a factor in why my colleagues now don't really trust me with that kind of stuff anymore. But before we get there, and before I start showing you what this package does, I will do that, but later on. Before that, I just want to ask, who remembers this website, this old font? Who remembers this? Now, quick question here. So I'm aware that it's a black screen because I want you to look. Quick question here. Who thought that said google.com? Now, I know this is a virtual thing, so I can't see how you're responding. But I'll be honest, it was convincing to me when I first saw this. But actually, this website is goggle.com. And what it is it's a website that will actually do bad things to your machine, essentially. So in the early 2000s, this was a real website that hosted malware, and it relied on users mistyping google.com. So if they mistyped the word, they would get to this dark website, which would do very bad things to their computer. And actually, good news is that I was able to get some archive footage of a computer being infected with the goggle.com malware. And actually, I'll show that to you now. So if I just change slides, this is a machine, and this is the machine after being infected with goggle.com's malware. So we can see, hopefully, that this is big business and this is a big deal. So in this talk, what I'd like to do is first of all explain kind of how malware works, but also how it gets onto your machine from PyPI. Once we've done that, I also want to explain how it's been made to look legitimate, how it actually works, and how, most importantly, how we can protect ourselves from this malware. Now, there is a quick disclaimer I've got to give you, which is that first of all, malware does constantly evolve and change. And so all of the things that I'm going to show you today are the current practices. There are lots of things in the malware I'll be showing you that are really being done constantly now. But this will change over time. Those threat actors will get better and better at doing these things and hiding their bad code in different ways. So do bear in mind this, in a few years, this might not be as relevant. Also, I am not a security professional, right? I am a Python developer, and I'm just passionate about this topic. Now, if you are interested more, there's lots of great stuff I can point you towards that you can read about and learn from. But what I want to do with this talk today is just show you what I've learned and show you how you can protect yourself from these kinds of scams and these kinds of pieces of bad malware, basically. Does that sound good? Hopefully it does. I'm British, so I'll be taking regular tea breaks throughout this presentation. So let's move on, shall we? Okay, this is a little bit of a participation section. So I'm aware because we're doing this virtually, we're all remote. We're not going to be shouting, you're not going to be able to shout out at me, and that's fine. So, in your head, maybe just have a think about some of these questions, but I'll just be asking a couple of different questions now. So I'm just going to ask you some questions from a study that was done in 2022 by the Ponemon Research Institute. And what they did was they studied 550 organizations that had had a malware attack and had been infected with malware. So I want to ask you this question here, just have a think about it. What is the average cost of a data breach for one of those organizations? Feel free to shout it out at home if you want to. That's also fine. I'll tell you, 240 million pesos, which is pretty high. That's a lot of money. It works out at about $4.35 million. The next question here is what percent of those breaches were caused by stolen or compromised credentials. And I don't mean phishing attacks here. I mean situations where malware got onto someone's machine and was able to steal their credentials that way by scraping them. Have a think. I'm looking at my watch that I don't own. I don't have a watch. However, what I will do is tell you the answer. 19%. So almost 1 in 5 attacks were carried out this way. But what does that mean to us? That's the real question. And I think one thing about this really stands out, and that is that I think developers are now a target. Now, I think there's 2 reasons that really is the case. And the first one being that developers download a lot of software packages, and PyPI is a great attack vector for that. But more importantly, there's also the case that some developers will include packages into their own software that are used by end users. And in this case, if a malware actor can get a bad package inside of a developer's software, what that means is that they can then introduce vulnerabilities that users can be opened up to as well. So this means that by infecting one developer and getting into production, they might actually be able to infect a whole load of people, all by getting through that one defense. So developers are a real target. Now, developers themselves being targets, they're often targets for remote code execution, which is the case where credentials might be stolen, they might get some ransomware on their machine or their company network. There might also be some situations where there's crypto mining or crypto diversion. So crypto mining, you probably know, where a bad actor will install software that actually mines cryptocurrency for that attacker. But crypto diversion is a new scam, which I've just been hearing about more recently. And in crypto diversion, how it works is that funds are basically diverted from a actual user's crypto wallet to their attacker. So again, these are really big bad things you do not want to happen to you, and you don't want to get onto your work or your home network. But more importantly, there's also the possibility for end user targeting. And this is the case where a package might behave as expected, but it might include some vulnerabilities. So it gets packaged in, but it uses maybe outdated versions of things like that. And this means that a developer can actually get their users at risk. And we really don't want that to happen, which is why this is so important. I'm just going to take a quick break to drink some tea. As I did warn you I would be doing throughout the presentation. So I'd just like to set a scene for you. Okay, so it's a dark and stormy castle. The rain is pelting down. There's a man and he's running away from the castle. He looks behind him, there's bats chasing after him. He can hear the howling of wolves in the distance. As you pass by, you hear him, he looks at you, you connect, your eyes connect, they meet. He looks at you with those wild eyes and he says, "Stay away." There's a crash of lightning. He says, "Stay away from the Python package index." Now, I don't think you should really stay away from PyPI. It's an incredibly useful resource, right? It's something that we all use a lot of the time if we're Python developers. But it does put you at a certain risk. And the biggest kind of risk that you will find in terms of downloading malware is typosquatting. Okay? So typosquatting, that's the concept where essentially you have a piece of malware that is similarly named to some actual software. And when you type something, and if you type pip install something, if you type that incorrectly, but that package exists, you are going to get that package from PyPI because it will think you want that package that's on there. So again, this is how the goggle.com scam worked. This was how that malware got onto a user's machine in the early 2000s. Was a user would think they were going to Google, but they'd have mistyped it, or they've got confused about the word, and they end up going to get some malware instead, and they get a drive-by download of malware to their machine. So quick question here, another one for you to think about at home, which is what percentage of packages on PyPI are estimated to be using a typosquatting technique? Just have a think. So the answer is 3%, which is quite high actually, especially given that these will be clustered around the most popular packages that we have. A new question for you now. What percentage of PyPI downloads are estimated to be of typosquatting packages? So this is, I guess, the really relevant question here. What percentage do we think? So the answer is 0.5%, which is about 1 in 200. Now, that's not ideal because there are millions of downloads every day from the Python package index, and that means that there's a significant number of people who are downloading stuff that maybe don't want to be downloading, right? They're downloading stuff that maybe they didn't think they were downloading. So this is a real problem. But let's talk about it some more. Let's talk about types of typosquats. And again, this title itself is a misspelling or a typosquat version of the word typosquats. Yep, I thought of that and I couldn't sleep all night. I was so excited about it. But yes, so there's two types of typosquatting techniques that are used. There's misspelling and then there's confusion. But let's talk about them. So with a misspelling typosquat, what will happen is we'll have a package that you just type in wrongly, you just misspell it. For example, the request package, we probably all know, is a package in Python. If you don't know, it's basically something that's used very commonly to do HTTP requests. But these examples I'm about to show you are real malware that was found on the Python package index. Is request with 2 R's. If you'd misspelled, if you type 2 R's, pip install requests, you now have malware. Or requests, or equests, right? So these are all real pieces of malware that genuinely did exist. And they were based on this misspelling principle. But there's also confusion typosquats where the user just forgets the name of the package, right? So there might be some confusion between the order or separation between words. So for example, easy install, it might be, is it easy install or install easy? Is it easy dash install? Is it easy hyphen or underscore install? We don't know, right? So if you're not familiar with a package, then you might make these kinds of mistakes and you might accidentally get some malware based on that principle. There's also versioning confusion. So some cases, for example, things like this, like request 3, right? So a user who's not familiar with requests or not very experienced, they might say, hey, this looks good. This looks like a beta version of requests version 3. Cool, I'll download that. But this is actual malware, and I actually did see that on the Python package index. So, you've really got to be careful and make sure you're downloading the right stuff. So I'm like, when I present live, when I present in front of people, I am quite audience participation focused. I like people to feel like they can join in and be part of the event. So I'm going to just do a little bit of that. And again, just play along at home if you'd like to, wherever you are. A little bit of a guess here. We're just going to guess. I'll show you 2 packages. Just tell me which one is typosquatted and which one is real. Okay. So here's 2 packages. There's python.env or .env python. Which of those is the typosquatted package? Which of these is malware? Okay, so the answer, .env python, that was an actual piece of malware that was found on PyPI. Here's another one. Looking for the Python package which is not really the legitimate package. Which is the malware here? libcurl or pycurl? So the answer is libcurl. And this one is actually quite a tough one because what pycurl is it's a wrapper, it's an interface to libcurl, which is a kind of system package. And so actually this is a very reasonable assumption that you might make. You might think, oh, it's called the same thing on PyPI as it is the actual thing I'm trying to call. And so these can be quite clever typosquats in this confusion-based way. Now let's talk about how we can make these things look legitimate and how these things are actually made to look legitimate. So one technique is having malware as dependencies. And how this works is you have an innocent looking package, but actually that package includes some dependencies which are malicious. Now this thing, it might actually behave as you expect. It might behave as normal as you expect the normal package to, just to avoid suspicion. But actually that means that when you actually run it, it's going to do some bad stuff to your machine. There's also a situation where you have malicious commits added over time. So this can kind of work in one of 2 ways. I'll show you those. So in way 1, first of all, a project is safe and there is no malware, but then it builds a user base. And finally, malware is actually added. So I'll give you a real example of this, and that's a package called fastapi-toolkit. Now in this situation, what happened was the users, the actual people maintaining this package, they were just using, they built some stuff just to help you use FastAPI, which is some extra utility functions and things like that. But they were fine until versions 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, all the way up to 0.26. But then when 0.27 came around, and it was quite a popular package at this time and people had been using it, it was actually found that 0.27 actually was committed with some malware. So this means that over time, what had happened is those developers had gained some trust and built a base, and then malware got added. Another way this can work is that a repo might get a new maintainer. So for example, if you maintain an open source repo of some kind, then you might get people making open source contributions, and maybe somebody there decides, oh, I'd like to help out, I'd like to be involved. You say yes, and suddenly malware is added when you give them admin access. So there are some real challenges here that do genuinely happen. Now let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about starjacking. So this, I don't know if you've heard of this word. If you have, awesome. If not, no problem, because I'm about to explain it. But what it is, essentially, is that on PyPI, if you give a URL for your GitHub page or for whatever, it's not verified. They don't verify what that page goes to, that you own that page. And so that can be abused. So there's one example I'd like to just play one more Guess the Malware game. Which of these is malware? Request toolbelt or toolbelt requests? I'll tell you. It's toolbelt requests, and I know that because it's my malware that I made, and I put it onto PyPI. So when we're here, actually, I'll show you on the page. You can see in the bottom left there the statistics, and you can see, I'll zoom in. You can see that I've got 895 GitHub stars, even though this is a piece of malware that I just invented myself. It doesn't do anything, but because I put in the actual URL of the proper package, it's just displayed that instead. So a user who's not familiar might see this and think I am the real package. So a typical way this kind of thing can work is that first of all, a user would install a typosquatted package. Okay? By mistake, by some confusion, but that package would depend on a malicious package. And that one would then run and decode some base64 encoded code, which is base64 encoded just to slightly hide that code to show what the behavior is. But all that code will usually do is download the actual malware, the real payload from a remote server. And that's usually the attack chain that goes along. And so the overall result of this is a very sad snake. And we want to avoid that. So I think it's time for me to show you what happens if I run some malware on my machine. So first of all, I mentioned this Python SDK that I maintain. This is what I do. And you can see that this is a real package. This is really available on GitHub. You can see that if you want to. But I made a fake version of this. And I didn't want it to be so similarly named. So I called it not the Vonage Python SDK because I didn't want people to actually download this because it does contain some malware. And you can see in the PyPI page here that actually, I've said don't use, but actually it is very similar and it does contain the actual real code. But also you can see that the statistics are the same and it has got 150 stars, even though this is fake and not real and it's malware. Okay. So what I want to do is just summarize what's going on here. So first of all, I've got two projects here that I've put onto PyPI. There's not the Vonage Python SDK and there's toolbelt requests. Okay. So I'm not going to do this live. I'll show you this locally on my machine because I didn't want to keep them up there. And I'll be honest, PyPI will eventually notice, and they do sometimes remove bits of, packages that they don't trust. So actually, I didn't want to keep uploading malware because I've already had to make a new account once during the testing phase of this. So I'll just show you locally on my machine what's going to happen. Okay. So if I just go over here, you can now see that this is not the Vonage Python SDK. This is, you can see in my setup.py file, it's not the Vonage Python SDK. And you can see the version, you can see all this stuff. This stuff is all normal and expected except for this one line here, which is toolbelt requests. Now this is an extra dependency that was not present in the actual SDK. So this will behave as normal except for the fact that this one bit will just be included as well. So what's kind of interesting here, though, is it's not just downloading it, because inside of the client file, inside of here, we do have some imports, but we also import from toolbelt requests, which is that fake dependency. We import a random function. But because we've actually, in our init.py file, we're actually specifying that we're importing everything from this client file. That means that when we do that, when we import this package, which is called Vonage internally, it's called Vonage, this one, when we import that, what it will do is it will actually download, well, it won't download it, you've already downloaded it. What it will do is actually show you that malware, it will run that malware. So let's look at that package. So this package, this is requests, toolbelt requests, and this is normal. This is a normal setup py file. In requests util, there is nothing, because all there is a function that just prints something out. That's all they have. More importantly though, inside of this init.py file, you can see there's nothing going on here, or so we would think. But actually, and again, this is a real technique that is used by bad actors. If we scroll across a little bit, if we just scroll across, oh, what's this? So you can see here that we've actually got, oh, looks like a base64 encoded string. So what will actually happen is when we import this, it will run that. It will run that base64 encoded string, or decode it, and then it will run that Python script which is inside of there. So what's left? Let's do it. So here I've got a virtual environment, and inside of here I've downloaded my fake version of the SDK. So if I do a pip list now, you should be able to see that. So you can see I've got not the Vonage Python SDK and this extra dependency here, toolbelt requests. So if I open up a Python shell and I actually import this, if I actually import this package now, what's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen at first is we're going to import Vonage, but inside of that, we're going to import the second package and run that base64 encoded payload. So let's do that. As you can see, the worst malware of all. I don't want to play too much because I don't want PyCon Philippines to get copyright claimed, but it's a beautiful song. And again, the worst malware you can get that I'm willing to put on my machine right now. So there you have it. Let's just go back to the presentation. So you can see here that that chain of events did happen. Just to summarize, I'll just open up that show again. There we go. So just to summarize what happened there, we imported again this fake package, which then ran that code, which rickrolled us. Okay. So how can we protect ourselves from these kinds of very malicious attacks? There's two sides to this, right? Because there's a side of being a maintainer of a package, and there's a side of being a user of a package. And I want to talk about both because I am both of those things. So as a maintainer, you've got to factor in that your dependencies might become compromised by some kind of attack, as we've discussed. So the best way to avoid that is at least to use automated scanning tools, which lets you know if things have become compromised. So things like mend.io, which was formerly Whitesource. My company uses this. I don't, we're not sponsored by them or anything. You can use them if you want. I'm just saying that they exist. But there's also Dependabot, which you can use, who are GitHub based. But there's other tools as well. But consider using something. As maintainers, we might also want to consider defensive typosquatting, which is where you preemptively typosquat your own packages. So if you remember there, I created a fake package that I thought users might confuse. You can do that yourself as well. So you give your package a similar name and just basically to keep from malware from being added there so your users don't accidentally get the wrong thing. So there was somebody, William Bengston, who actually typosquatted defensively over 1,000 packages. And in 2 years, those packages had a combined total of 500,000 downloads, which is pretty high, right? And every time one of those was downloaded, that's somebody who thought they were getting a different package, but instead they got this defended typosquat. And that just shows you that actually, if you maintain an important library with a lot of use, you should really consider something like this. Now, as a package user, I would say, first of all, don't type package names into your shell. So if you're typing pip install, you can easily make a typo or get confused. And a better way to sort of think about this is to use a requirements file instead. So install your packages this way. And that way you're not just going to make an easy typo. Again, you might want to use automated scanning tools. And if you're using a mirror, you might also need to check the latest safe version of that package. And I'll just explain why really quickly. So if you're using a mirror, what essentially happens here is often mirrors are set, so they are basically not going to check if they've got the latest package. So if they've got the latest package, they won't roll back essentially. So what I mean by that is that, for example, with the requests toolbelt, that fake package where malware was added in one release, we were actually ended up in the situation where 0.27 was unsafe, but 0.26 was fine. And so PyPI rolled that back. So if you download directly from PyPI, you're safe. But the problem was that actually a lot of mirrors are set so they wouldn't roll back because 0.27 is the later package. So in that case, as a mirror user, you're actually at risk even though you're safe from PyPI. Now, if you're doing things in a big enterprise, you may be using a mirror internally. So just if you are, please do consider this because you do want to stay safe if possible. All right, let's just have a quick sum up of everything we're talking about. So typosquatting on PyPI is a very real attack vector. Also, there are benign packages which are innocent, that become malicious over time or with a new maintainer. So you should vet your dependencies carefully, and you should use automated vulnerability scanning tools if you can. If you're a maintainer, you might want to use automated scanning tools and, consider defensive typosquatting. You also might want to be careful when you're using mirrors. Now, more importantly than that, don't give up on security because it will never let you down, run around, or desert you. Thank you very much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. And I can't wait for your questions. I'm just going to put on this final slide here with the actual final point here. Reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions, if you want to connect. But also, scan that if you need any resources from this talk as well. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Have you been a victim of typosquatting before? This is a question from Jeff.
Hey, Jeff. Good news for me. I haven't actually personally been a victim of this. I've never, to my knowledge at least, installed malware on my computer. Although I will say, as these threat actors get better and better at dealing with these things over time and hiding their malware, I think what's key here is that we don't know. There may be vulnerabilities that we haven't discovered. There may be techniques that have been used to hide malware that we're not aware of. And so actually, I would like to say I've never been a victim of malware, but I don't know. Maybe there is a crypto miner running somewhere on my machine that I, accidentally downloaded one time. So I think that's the thing is I may be doing all the things right, but that's just what we know right now. And the fact is that these things, do change over time. They do evolve, and these things get harder and harder to detect. Hopefully that answers your question, but I guess, the answer is hopefully not. Fingers crossed.
He is like, any anecdotes on typosquatting victims and what happened to them?
So I've not personally spoken to any people who've overtly been hacked in this way. But what I will say is I do remember reading, when I was sort of doing a lot of research about the situation I talked about where a package is open source and then a maintainer will add another person into, to give them admin access to add malware. And I do remember seeing that this did happen with a particular package.